Hello, YouTube. Welcome to the Isolated Literary Society presents Daily Austen with Sarah Shay. It's me and Emma. That's this book. Instagram, if you would like. Oh, hi, Gooly Glass. If you would like to watch this and have me actually facing you, the whole time, I'll occasionally glance over at my tablet, but mostly I'm going to be talking to my computer where the YouTube is. Oh my god, it annoys me every time I leave this closet open. Okay, there we go. I closed it. Did I close it so hard it bounced? Oh no, there was a cardboard box. I was making a funny face at YouTube, so I didn't notice it didn't close all the way. Hilarious. Anyway, Ghoulie, for a second, when you said it's super hot, I didn't realize you were talking about my comment about hope it's a nice day. And I thought you were saying the book. Like, oh my gosh, Jane Austen's Emma, so hot. Hello, Andrea, too. Anyway, if you guys want to come over to the YouTube, it's youtube.com/thesarahshay at your discretion. The stream works both places. Anyway, also, if you're just catching this for the first time, you can go to my YouTube and all of the previous chapters are archived there. Now, yesterday we had some connectivity issues and I got cut off towards the end of chapter 21. So we're going to start just a little bit before. I'm going to actually start with Harriet arriving at Hartfield and do her entire monologue about the hat shop or whatever. So get the flow going. All right. All right, here we go. This is the end of chapter 21 since we got cut off yesterday. The shower was heavy but short, and it had not been over 5 minutes. They're talking about rain, by the way, in case anyone's like thrown off. Someone did not just take a shower. And it had not been over 5 minutes when in came Harriet, with just the heated, agitated look which hurrying thither with a full heart was likely to give. And the, "Oh, Miss Woodhouse, what do you think has happened?" which instantly burst forth, had all the evidence of corresponding perturbation. As the blow was given, Emma felt that she could not now show greater kindness than in listening, and Harriet, unchecked, ran eagerly through what she had to tell. Emma is expecting that what Harriet is upset about is finding out that Mr. Elton has just gotten married. And yet, she had set out from Mrs. Goddard's half an hour ago. She does a weird thing where sometimes people, it's written like dialogue, but it's not in the first person. I don't know why. She had set out from Mrs. Goddard's half an hour ago. She had been afraid it would rain. She had been afraid it would pour down every moment, but she thought she might get to Hartfield first. She had hurried on as fast as possible, but then, as she was passing by the house where a young woman was making up a gown for her, she thought she would just step in and see how it went on, and though she did not seem to stay half a moment there, soon after she came out, it began to rain, and she did not know what to do, so she ran on directly as fast as she could and took shelter at Ford's. Ford's was the principal woolen draper, linen draper, and haberdasher shop united, the shop first in size and fashion in the place. And so there she sat, without any idea of anything in the world, full 10 minutes perhaps, when all of a sudden, who should come in? To be sure, it was so very odd, but they always dealt at Ford's. Who should come in but Elizabeth Martin and her brother? Dear Miss Woodhouse, only think! I thought I should have fainted. I did not know what to do. I was sitting near the door. Elizabeth saw me directly, but he did not. He was busy with the umbrella. I am sure she saw me, but she looked away directly and took no notice. And they both went to quite the farther end of the shop, and I kept sitting near the door. Oh dear, I was so miserable. I am sure I must have been as white as my gown. I could not go away, because of the rain, but I did so wish myself anywhere in the world but there. Oh dear, Miss Woodhouse. Well, alas, I fancy he looked round and saw me, for instead of going on with their buyings, they began whispering to one another. I'm sure they were talking of me, and I could not help thinking that he was persuading her to speak to me. Do you think he was, Miss Woodhouse? For presently she came forward, came quite up to me, and asked how I did, and seemed ready to shake hands if I would. She did not do any of it in the same way that she used. I could see she was altered, but however, she seemed to try to be very friendly, and we shook hands and stood talking for some time, but I know no more what I said. I was in such a tremble. I remember she said she was sorry we never met now, which I thought almost too kind. Dear Miss Woodhouse, I was absolutely miserable. By that time, it was beginning to hold up, and I was determined that nothing should stop me from getting away. But then, only think, I found he was coming up towards me too, slowly, and as if he did not quite know what to do. And so he came and spoke, and I answered, and I stood for a minute feeling dreadfully, one cannot tell how. And then I took courage and said it did not rain and I must go. And so off I set. And I had not got 3 yards from the door when he came after me, only to say if I was going to Hartfield, he thought I had much better go round to Mr. Cole's stables, for I should find the way near way quite floated by this rain. Oh dear, I thought I would have been the death of me. Oh, so I said I was very much obliged to him. I could not do less. And then he went back to Elizabeth, and I came round by the stables. I believe I did, but I hardly knew where I was or anything about it. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, I would rather have done anything than had it happen. And yet, there was a sort of satisfaction in seeing him behave so pleasantly and so kindly. And Elizabeth, too. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, do talk to me and make me comfortable again. Oh, what a speech. And here is an illustration of Elizabeth and Robert Martin coming upon Harriet in the shop at Ford's and him being busy with the umbrella. We have another illustration that's actually relevant to what's happening in the story.
Yes.
Instead of just some throwaway thing. Oh. Very sincerely did Emma wish to do so, but it was not immediately in her power. She was obliged to stop and think. In case you forgot, Emma convinced Harriet not to accept Robert Martin's offer of marriage, even though Harriet was obviously in love with Robert Martin, because Emma thinks she can do better. She was obliged to stop and think. She was not thoroughly comfortable herself. The young man's conduct and his sister's seemed the result of real feeling, and she could not but pity them. As Harriet described it, there had been an interesting mixture of wounded affection and genuine delicacy in their behavior, but she had believed them to be well-meaning, worthy people before, and what difference did this make in the evils of the connection? It was folly to be disturbed by it. Of course he must be sorry to lose her. They must be all sorry. Ambition as well as love had probably been mortified. They might all have hoped to rise by Harriet's acquaintance. And besides, what was the value of Harriet's description? So easily pleased, so little discerning. What signified her praise? Oh, you're such a good friend, Emma.
Yeah.
Could it be that I've been wrong? No, it's Harriet who is wrong.
Yes.
It must be the children. She exerted herself and did try to make her comfortable by considering all that had passed as a mere trifle and quite unworthy of being dwelt on. It might be distressing for the moment, said she, but you seem to have behaved extremely well, and it is over, and may never, can never, as a first meeting, occur again, and therefore you need not think about it. Harriet said, very true, and she would not think about it, but she still talked of it. Still she would talk of nothing else, and Emma at last, in order to put the Martins out of her head, was obliged to hurry on the news, which she had meant to give with so much tender caution, hardly knowing herself whether to rejoice or to be ashamed, or rejoice or to be angry, ashamed or only amused, at such a state of mind in poor Harriet. Such a confusion of Mr. Elton's importance with her. Mr. Elton's rights, however, gradually revived. Though she did not feel the first intelligence as she might have done the day before or an hour before, its interest soon increased. And before their first conversation was over, she had talked herself into all the sensations of curiosity, wonder, and regret, pain and pleasure, as to this fortunate Miss Hawkins, which would conduce to place the Martins under proper subordination in her fancy. She was sad about the wrong thing, but I quickly made her sad about the right thing.
Yes, exactly. It's like, good. Let her be miserable about The proper gentleman.
Yeah, like, she doesn't even take a pause and go, like, maybe I shouldn't tell her about Mr. Elton since she's already upset. No, she's like, well, I'll tell her about Mr. Elton, and soon she'll be upset about the proper thing.
Yeah.
Emma learned to be rather glad that there had been such a meeting. It had been serviceable in deadening the first shock, without retaining any influence to alarm. As Harriet now lived, the Martins could not get at her without seeking her, where hitherto they had wanted either the courage or the condescension to seek her. For since her refusal of the brother, the sisters had never been at Mrs. Goddard's, and a 12-month might pass without their being thrown together again with any necessity or even any power of speech. And that is the end of chapter 21. All right.
I mean, you could try to look at it charitably and be like, she was trying to like rip off the Band-Aid, but
yeah, that's the most charitable thing you can say.
Giving her a little too much credit.
Perhaps a bit too much, I think.
Because she still thinks that she was right.
Well, no, sure. She definitely still thinks she was right, but
yeah,
she's wrong in thinking that. All right, chapter 22. Here we go. Oh, hello, Aaron. Glad you made it. Human nature is so well disposed towards those who are in interesting situations that a young person who either marries or dies is sure to be kindly spoken of.
That's a great juxtaposition.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Wow, that would make a great, like, that if that was the first sentence of this book, it would be one of the most famous first sentences of all time.
Yeah, right up there with Pride and Prejudice.
A week had not passed since Miss Hawkins's name was first mentioned in Highbury, before she was, by some means or other, discovered to have every recommendation of person and mind, to be handsome, elegant, highly accomplished, and perfectly amiable. And when Mr. Elton himself arrived to triumph in his happy prospects and circulate the fame of her merits, there was very little more for him to do than to tell her Christian name and say whose music she principally played. Mr. Elton returned a very happy man. He had gone away rejected and mortified, because Emma refused him. Disappointed in a very sanguine hope, after a series of what had appeared to him strong encouragement, and not only losing the right lady, but finding himself debased to the level of a very wrong one. He had gone away deeply offended. He came back engaged to another, and to another as superior, of course, to the first, as under such circumstances what is gained always is to what is lost. He came back gay and self-satisfied, eager and busy, caring nothing for Miss Woodhouse and defying Miss Smith. Rude.
Seriously.
The charming Augusta Hawkins, in addition to all the usual advantages of perfect beauty and merit, was in possession of an independent fortune of so many thousands as would always be called 10. It's a very weird way of saying it.
That is, yes.
A point of some dignity as well as some convenience. The story told well, he had not thrown himself away. He had gained a woman of 10,000 pounds or thereabouts, and he had gained her with such delightful rapidity. And the first hour of introduction had been so very soon followed by distinguishing notice. The history which he had to give Mrs. Cole of the rise and progress of the affair was so glorious, the steps so quick, from the accidental rencontre to the dinner at Mr. Green's and the party at Mrs. Brown's, smiles and blushes rising in importance, with consciousness and agitation richly scattered. The lady had been so easily impressed, so sweetly disposed, had, in short, to use a most intelligible phrase, been so very ready to have him, that vanity and prudence were equally contented. It's like 4 weeks or something. Didn't they say he couldn't have been gone for more than 4 weeks?
He hadn't been gone more than 6 weeks.
6 weeks? Okay. Still, like...
Definitely not 2 months.
That was quick.
Yes.
Well, that escalated quickly.
Perhaps not quite as quick as Mr. Collins, but still close.
Oh, sure. Nothing could ever be as fast as that particular engagement.
I mean, he wants to be engaged, you know?
Yeah. He had caught both substance and shadow, both fortune and affection, and was just the happy man he ought to be, talking only of himself and his own concerns, expecting to be congratulated, ready to be laughed at, and with cordial, fearless smiles, now addressing all the young ladies of the place to whom, a few weeks ago, he would have been more cautiously gallant. The wedding was no distant event, as the parties had only themselves to please, and nothing but the necessary preparations to wait for. And when he set out for Bath again, there was a general expectation, which a certain glance of Mrs. Cole's did not seem to contradict, that when he next entered Highbury, he would bring his bride. Oh my God, they made her so horrible in the in the recent movie. Like, I thought a little over the top, but what are you gonna do? I guess not horrible, just ridiculous. During his present short stay, Emma had barely seen him, but just enough to feel that the first meeting was over, and give her the impression of his not being improved by the mixture of pique and pretension which now spread over his air. She was, in fact, beginning very much to wonder that she had ever thought him pleasing at all, and his sight was so inseparably connected with some very disagreeable feelings that, except in a moral light, as a penance, a lesson, a source of profitable humiliation to her own mind, she would have been thankful to be assured of never seeing him ever again. She wished him very well, but he gave her pain, and his welfare 20 miles off would administer most satisfaction. The pain of his continued residence in Highbury, however, must certainly be lessened by his marriage. Many vain solicitudes would be prevented, many awkwardnesses smoothed by it. A Mrs. Elton would be an excuse for any change of intercourse. Former intimacy might sink without remark. It would be almost beginning their life of civility again. Of the lady individually, Emma thought very little. She was good enough for Mr. Elton, no doubt, accomplished enough for Highbury, handsome enough, to look plain probably by Harriet's side. As to connection, where Emma was perfectly easy, persuaded that after all his own vaunted claims and disdain of Harriet, he had done nothing. On that article, truth seemed attainable. What she was must be uncertain, but who she was might be found out. And setting aside the £10,000, did not appear that she was at all Harriet's superior. She brought no name, no blood, no alliance. Miss Hawkins was the youngest of the 2 daughters of a Bristol merchant, of course, he must be called. But as the whole of the profits of his mercantile life appeared so very moderate, it was not unfair to guess the dignity of his line of trade had been very moderate also. Parts of every winter she had been used to spend in Bath, but Bristol was her home, the very heart of Bristol. For though the father and mother had died some years ago, an uncle remained, in the law line. Nothing more distinctly honourable was hazarded of him that he was in the law line, and with him the daughter had lived. Emma guessed him to be the drudge of some attorney, and too stupid to rise. Oh, wow. I mean, she's judgy, but
she's really...
that's a lot.
Also, this is all presumption.
Yeah, I mean, it's like all presumption, but that's like, whoa, okay.
Yeah. She really does not want to think well of this.
Yeah, but like to say, oh, he's probably the drudge of some attorney, I would expect for her, and too stupid to rise. Like, oh, okay. Now we're calling names. Hi, Pepper. Oh, did I forget to feed you before I started the stream? The least you could do is come make a little cameo.
Nope. Oh, okay.
He does not want to do that. Sorry.
Never mind.
Sorry.
No pictures, please.
I'm not like just a little. Next time he comes over, you guys will be able to see him. I'm looking out for you.
Gotta get your daily
too
cat.
Stupid to rise. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. It's good to know all of her classes and remains.
Yeah. And all the grandeur of the connection seemed dependent on the elder sister, who was very well married, to a gentleman in a great way near Bristol, who kept 2 carriages. What do you say to that, Lizzie? That was the wind-up of the history. That was the glory of Miss Hawkins. Like, I can understand her noting that Miss Hawkins is not, like, doesn't bring any particular connections that Harriet doesn't.
Right.
As in defense of his rudeness towards Harriet.
Right.
But, like, she may be going a little overboard with the assuming
also,
the uncle is
she's
stupid.
still assuming a great deal about
Well, she's still assuming
Harriet.
a great deal about Harriet, yes.
Yeah. When
It
the
does seem
reality
like,
is that no one actually knows anything about Harriet.
yes, that's
connection.
the secret is nobody knows who Harriet's parents are.
Yeah.
She's a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
They only know that her parents apparently had enough money to send her to Mrs. Goddard's school. That's it.
Yeah.
Could she but given Harriet her feelings about it all? She had talked her into love, but alas, she was not so easily to be talked out of it. Yeah, that's what happens, Emma, when you mess with people. Can't get the cat back in the bag. The charm of an object to occupy the many vacancies of Harriet's mind was not to be talked away. He might be superseded by another. He certainly would, indeed. Nothing could be clearer. Even a Robert Martin would have been sufficient. But nothing else, she feared, would cure her. Harriet was one of those who, having once begun, would be always in love. And now, poor girl, she was considerably worse from this reappearance of Mr. Elton. She was always having a glimpse of him somewhere or other. Emma saw him only once, but 2 or 3 times every day Harriet was sure just to meet with him, or just to miss him, just to hear his voice or see his shoulder, just to have something occur to preserve him in her fancy, in all the favoring warmth of surprise and conjecture. She was, moreover, perpetually hearing about him, for excepting when at Hartfield, she was always among those who saw no fault in Mr. Elton, and found nothing so interesting as the discussion of his concerns, and every report, therefore, every guess, all that had already occurred, all that might occur in the arrangement of his affairs, comprehending income, servants, and furniture, was continually in agitation around her. Her regard was receiving strength by invariable praise of him, and her regrets kept alive, and feelings irritated by ceaseless repetitions of Miss Hawkins's happiness, and continual observation of how he seemed attached, of how much he seemed attached. His air as he walked by the house, the very sitting of his hat, being all in proof of how much he was in love.
You can always tell by the way a hat sits on a head.
You absolutely. There's no surer way to know someone's in love than by the way their hat sits upon their head.
Yeah. The only reason they didn't write it in
Still
the song, It's in His Kiss, is that it didn't rhyme as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, that song was originally It's in His Hat.
Yeah.
But they wanted something a little like saucier, for
Yeah.
the radio.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Everybody, even your grandma knows it's in his hat, but tell us about some kissing, Anyway. Where the hell? Oh,
sorry.
That's all right. Where are we here?
I don't know.
Completely lost my place. There we go.
Something about the
His
hat.
Had it been allowable entertainment, had there been no pain to her friend or reproach to herself in the waverings of Harriet's mind, Emma would have been amused by its variations. Sometimes Mr. Elton predominated, sometimes the Martins, and each was occasionally useful as a check to the other. Mr. Elton's engagement had been the cure of the agitation of meeting Mr. Martin. The unhappiness produced by the knowledge of that engagement had been a little put aside by Elizabeth Martin's calling at Mrs. Goddard's a few days afterwards. Harriet had not been at home, but a note had been prepared and left for her, written in the very style of in the very style to touch, a small mixture of reproach with a great deal of kindness. Until Mr. Elton himself appeared, she would have been much occupied. She had been much occupied by it, continually pondering over what could be done in return, and wishing to do more than she dared to confess. But Mr. Elton in person had driven away all such cares. While he stayed, the Martins were forgotten, and on the very morning of his setting off for Bath again, Emma, to dissipate some of the distress it occasioned, judged it best for her to return Elizabeth Martin's visit. How that visit was to be acknowledged, what would be necessary, and what might be safest, had been a point of some doubtful consideration. Absolute neglect of the mother and sisters, when invited to come, would be ingratitude. It must not be, and yet the danger of a renewal of the acquaintance. After much thinking, she could determine on nothing better than Harriet's returning the visit, but in a way that, if they had understanding, should convince them that it was to be only a formal acquaintance. She meant to take her in the carriage, leave her at the Abbey Mill while she drove a little farther, and call for her again so soon as to allow no time for insidious applications or dangerous recurrences to the past, and give the most decided proof of what degree of intimacy was chosen for the future. So good of you, Emma, to manage the whole thing.
Yes.
She could think of nothing better, and though there was something in it which her own heart could not approve. Wow, is that?
I wonder what that is.
What is that? Oh, Emma, is that your conscience? Just pricking just a little bit in the back of your mind? Something of ingratitude merely glossed over. It must be done, or what would become of Harriet?
What indeed?
What indeed?
She
What
might be happy.
Right. What would become of Harriet if Emma had not ever interfered in her life? Well, she'd be happily married to Robert Martin by now. Yeah. That's what would have happened. Yeah. She never would have looked twice at Mr. Elton, and she'd be happily married. That's what would have happened.
Yep.
Just saying. Not that I advocate for 17-year-olds being happily married, but
it was a different time.
It was a different time. And also,
People only live to like 40 or 50, so, you know.
Well, 17 was still a bit young to get married even
okay.
then. But, I mean, Mr. Martin goes to Mr. Knightley, remember, to ask if he thought that Harriet might be a little too young. And
That
that
is
he
true.
might be too young to settle down.
That's true.
And wait a minute, are they? Oh no, they're 7 years apart. Oh no, they always say they're not sure how old Robert Martin is. They might be.
That's true. They never quite give us age.
Yeah, but
He's
it sounds like
6 or 7 and 20 or something like that.
No, I think no. He's like, I think they say he's like 3 or 4 and 20.
Oh, okay.
Because they say that might be too
Mr.
young.
Elton.
Yeah. They wonder if maybe that's a little too young to settle down. Or whatever, apparently.
Which is.
I mean, now it is, but compared to a 17-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're married.
But they might be wrong, and he might in fact be 5 and 20, making them the perfect 8 years apart that we know Jane Austen favors.
Yes.
Anyway, chapter 23. Small heart had Harriet for visiting. Never heard that figure speech before. Small heart.
No, I haven't either, but it does make sense. Like it's immediately.
Yeah, no, I get it what it means, but yeah, it's kind of poetic.
Mm-hmm.
Only half an hour before her friend called for her at Mrs. Goddard's, her evil stars. Ooh, this is getting very poetic. Her evil stars had led her to the very spot where, at that moment, a trunk directed to the Reverend Philip Elton, White Hart, Bath, was to be seen under the operation of being lifted into the butcher's cart, which was to convey it to where the coaches passed. And everything in this world, excepting that trunk and the direction, was consequently a blank. Apparently his first name's Philip. Don't think that's ever addressed anywhere else.
Yeah.
She went, however, and when they reached the farm, and she was to be put down by the end of the road, at the end of the broad, neat gravel walk, which led between espalier apple trees to the front door, the sight of everything which had given her so much pleasure the autumn before was beginning to revive a little local agitation, and when they parted, Emma observed her to be looking around with a sort of fearful curiosity, which determined her not to allow the visit to exceed the proposed quarter of an hour and settled in Donwell. The quarter of an hour brought her punctually to the White Gate again, and Miss Smith, receiving her summons, was with her without delay, and unattended by any alarming young man. She came solitarily down the gravel walk, on Miss Martin just appearing at the door and parting with her seemingly with ceremonious civility. Harriet could not very much soon give an intelligible account. She was feeling too much, but at last Emma collected from her enough to understand the sort of meeting and the sort of pain it was creating. She had seen only Mrs. Martin and the two girls. They had received her doubtingly, if not coolly, and nothing beyond the merest commonplace had been talked almost all the time, till just at last, when Mrs. Martin saying all of a sudden that she thought Miss Smith was grown, had brought on a more interesting subject and a warmer manner. In that very room she had been measured last September with her two friends. There were the penciled marks and memorandums on the wainscot by the window. He had done it. They all seemed to remember the day, the hour, the party, the occasion, to feel the same consciousness, the same regrets, to be ready to return to the same good understanding, and they were just growing again like themselves, Harriet, as Emma must suspect, as ready as the best of them to be cordial and happy, when the carriage reappeared and all was over. Emma Woodhouse, party crasher, wet blanket extraordinaire.
Blocker.
Yeah. Party blocker. Wait, where was I? 14 minutes to be given to those with whom she had thankfully passed 6 weeks, not 6 months ago. Emma could not but picture it. Oh, sorry, I skipped something. The style of the visit and the shortness of it were then felt to be decisive. 14 minutes to be given to those with whom she had thankfully passed 6 weeks, not 6 months ago. Emma could not but picture it all, and feel how justly they might resent, how naturally Harriet must suffer. It was a bad business. She would have given a great deal, or endured a great deal, to have had the Martins in a higher rank of life.
Jeez.
They were so deserving that a little higher should have been enough. But as it was, how could she have done otherwise? Impossible. She could not repent.
Of course. Anything but that.
Anything but repent. Anything but acknowledge that you've done something wrong.
Yep.
They must be separated, but there was a great deal of pain in the process. So much to herself at this time that she soon felt the necessity of a little consolation, and resolved on going home by way of Randalls to procure it. Her mind was quite sick of Mr. Elton and the Martins. The refreshment of Randalls was absolutely necessary. And here we have an illustration of Mr. Robert Martin measuring, presumably, Harriet on the wall at Abbey Mill Farm. Which, that's curious. I didn't know people did that then, especially with teenagers.
Yeah.
Young ladies.
Apparently.
It was a good scheme, but on driving to the door, they heard that neither master nor mistress was at home. They had both been out some time. The man believed they were gone to Hartfield. "This is too bad," cried Emma as they turned away. "And now we shall just miss them. Too provoking. I do not know when I have been so disappointed." And she leaned back in the corner to indulge her murmurs, or to reason them away, probably a little of both, such being the commonest process of a not ill-disposed mind. Presently the carriage stopped. She looked up, and it was stopped by Mr. and Mrs. Weston, who were standing to speak to her. There was instant pleasure in the sight of them, and still greater pleasure was conveyed in sound, for Mr. Weston immediately accosted her with, "How do you do? How do you do? We have been sitting with your father. Glad to see him so well. Frank comes tomorrow. I had a letter this morning. We shall see him tomorrow by dinner time to a certainty. He is at Oxford today, and he comes for a whole fortnight. I knew it would be so. If he had come at Christmas, he could not have stayed 3 days. I was always glad he did not come at Christmas. And now we are going to have just the right weather for him. Fine, dry, settled weather. We shall enjoy him completely. Everything has turned out exactly as we could wish." Always so eager to be pleased.
Mm-hmm.
There was no resisting such news, no possibility of avoiding the influence of such a happy face as Mr. Weston's, confirmed as it all was by the words and countenance of his wife, fewer and quieter, but not less to the purpose. To know that she thought his coming certain was enough to make Emma consider it so, and sincerely did she rejoice in their joy. It was a most delightful reanimation of exhausted spirits. The worn-out past was sunk in the freshness of what was coming, and in the rapidity of half a moment's thought, she hoped Mr. Elton would now be talked of no more. If anything could make people get over Mr. Elton's marriage quickly in that town, it would be Mr. Frank Churchill finally showing up.
Yeah.
Mr. Weston gave her the history of the engagements at Enscombe, which allowed his son to answer for having an entire fortnight at his command, as well as the route and the method of his journey, and she listened and smiled and congratulated. "I shall soon bring him over to Hartfield," said he at the conclusion. Emma could imagine she saw a touch of the arm at this speech from his wife. "We had better move on, Mr. Weston," said she. "We are detaining the girls." Well, I am ready." And turning again to Emma, "But you must not be expecting such a very fine young man. You have only had my account, you know. I dare say he is really nothing extraordinary," though his own sparkling eyes at the moment were speaking a different conviction. Emma could look perfectly unconscious and innocent, and answer in a manner that appropriated nothing. Think of me tomorrow, my dear Emma, about 4 o'clock," was Mrs. Weston's parting injunction, spoken with some anxiety, and meant only for her. 4 o'clock. Depend upon it, he will be here by 3, was Mr. Weston's quick amendment, and so ended a most satisfactory meeting. Emma's spirits were mounted quite up to happiness. Everything wore a different air. James and his horses seemed not half so sluggish as before. When she looked at the hedges, she thought the elder at least must soon be coming out. And when she looked round to Harriet, she saw something like a look of spring, a tender smile even there. "Will Mr. Frank Churchill pass through Bath as well as Oxford?" was a question, however, which did not augur much. But neither geography nor tranquillity could come all at once, and Emma was now in a humor to resolve that they should both come in time. The morning of the interesting day arrived, and Mrs. Weston's faithful pupil did not forget, either at 10 or 11 or 12 o'clock, that she was to think of her at 4. "My dear, dear, anxious friend," said she in mental soliloquy, while walking downstairs from her own room, "always over-careful for everybody's comfort but your own. I see you now in all your little fidgets, going again and again into his room to be sure that all is right." The clock struck 12 as she passed through the hall. "'Tis 12. I shall not forget to think of you for hours hence. So it's supposed to be 4 hours hence? It's
Possibly.
FOR. And by this time tomorrow, perhaps, or a little later, I may be thinking of the possibility of their all calling here. I am sure they will bring him soon. She opened the parlor door and saw two gentlemen sitting with her father, Mr. Weston and his son. They had been arrived only a few minutes, and Mr. Weston had scarcely finished his explanation of Frank's being a day before his time, and her father was yet in the midst of his very civil welcome and congratulations when she appeared to have her share of surprise, introduction, and pleasure. The Frank Churchill so long talked of, so high in interest, was actually before her. He was presented to her, and she did not think too much had been said in his praise. He was a very good-looking young man. Height, air, address, all were unexceptionable, and his countenance had a great deal of the spirit and liveliness of his father's. He looked quick and sensible. She felt immediately that she should like him, and there was a well-bred ease of manner and a readiness to talk which convinced her that he came intended to be acquainted with her, and that acquainted they soon must be. He had reached Randalls the evening before. She was pleased with the eagerness to arrive which had made him alter his plan, and travel earlier, later, and quicker, that he might gain half a day. I told you yesterday, cried Mr. Weston with exultation. I told you all that he would be here before the time named. I remember what I used to do myself. Now, one cannot creep upon a journey. One cannot help getting on faster than one has planned. And the pleasure of coming in upon one's friends before the lookout begins is worth a great deal more than any little exertion it needs. It is a great pleasure when one can indulge in it, said the young man, though there are not many houses that I should presume on so far. But in coming home, I felt I might do anything. The word home made his father look on him with fresh complacency. Emma was directly sure he knew how to make himself agreeable. The conviction was strengthened by what followed. He was very much pleased with Randalls, though it was a most admirably arranged house, would hardly allow it even to be a very small, to be very, he was very much pleased with Randalls, thought it was a most admirably still more, and professed himself to have always felt the sort of interest in the country which none but one's own country gives, and the greatest curiosity to visit it. He has not been there since he was like 4 or something, I think.
Yeah.
Which
It
weird.
Yeah, feels like he couldn't even remember it probably.
Yeah. Well, yeah, presumably he wouldn't, except maybe some vague
Yeah.
a vague sense of having been somewhere else, you know.
Yeah.
It just is like so weird that basically 20 years
Yeah.
have passed and he's never visited.
Yeah.
That he should never have been able to indulge so amiable a feeling before passed suspiciously through Emma's brain, but still, if it were a falsehood, it was a pleasant one, and pleasantly handled. His manner had no air of study or exaggeration. He did really look and speak as if in a state of no common enjoyment. Their subjects in general were such as belonged to an opening acquaintance. On his side were the inquiries. Was she a horsewoman? Balls. Had they balls? Sorry. I'm 4. Was it a musical society? But when satisfied on all these points, and their acquaintance proportionally advanced, he contrived to find an opportunity, while their two fathers were engaged with each other, of introducing his mother-in-law, and speaking of her with so much handsome praise, so much warm admiration, so much gratitude for the happiness she secured to his father. Oh, mother-in-law apparently means stepmother.
Yes.
Which, I mean, in the literal spouse's parents as your as
you would call them your parents.
mother and father, like
Yeah.
brother and sister. You were just all family.
Yeah.
What's funny is as I read that sentence, I understood that it meant Mrs. Weston.
Yeah.
Even though I don't know that I've ever heard that before.
I don't think I have either, but yeah, I knew what it meant.
Makes sense. And her very kind reception of himself, as was an additional proof of his knowing how to please, and of his certainly thinking it worthwhile to try to please her. He did not advance a word of praise beyond what she knew to be thoroughly deserved by Mrs. Weston, but undoubtedly he could know very little of the matter.
Damn.
I'm just going to let these... We have the door open because it's such a nice day.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm getting a little warm in this hoodie. I hope you guys can hear that and it doesn't look like we're just sitting here going,
This is a portion of the video where we stare out the window.
yes. All right. I've definitely heard podcasts where someone's like, wait, hold on, let's just wait for that plane to pass. And it's like completely silent
Yeah,
on the podcast.
yeah.
Taking a plane break. All right. Sure. Every friend must rejoice in it, and the family from whom he had received such a blessing must be ever considered as having conferred the highest obligation on him. He got as near as he could to thanking her for Miss Taylor's merits, without seeming quite to forget that, in the common course of things, it was to be rather supposed that Miss Taylor had formed Miss Woodhouse's character than Miss Woodhouse Miss Taylor's. And at last, as it resolved to qualify his opinion completely for travelling round to its object, he wound it all up with astonishment at the youth and beauty of her person. Elegant, agreeable manners I was prepared for, said he, but I confess that, considering everything, I had not expected more than a very tolerable, well-looking woman of a certain age. I did not know I was to find a pretty young woman in Mrs. Weston. You cannot see too much perfection in Mrs. Weston for my feelings, said Emma. Were you to guess her to be 18, I should listen with pleasure, but she would be ready to quarrel with you for using such words. Don't let her imagine that you have spoken of her, and whom I might praise without any danger of being thought extravagant in my terms. Emma wondered whether the same suspicion of what might be expected from their knowing each other, which had taken strong possession of her mind, had ever crossed his.
People would think of them.
That people would think they would get together. And whether his compliments were to be considered as marks of acquiescence or proofs of defiance. She must see more of him to understand his ways. At present, she only felt they were agreeable. She had no doubt of what Mr. Weston was often thinking about. His quick eye she detected again and again, glancing towards them with a happy expression, and even when he might have determined not to look, she was confident that he was often listening. Her own father's perfect exemption from any thought of the kind, the entire deficiency in him of all such sort of penetration of suspicion, was a most comfortable circumstance. Happily, he was not further from approving matrimony than from foreseeing it. Though always objecting to every marriage that was arranged, he never suffered beforehand from the apprehension of any. It seemed as if he could not think so ill of any two persons' understanding as to suppose they meant to marry till it were proved against them. She blessed the favoring blindness. He could now, without the drawback of a single unpleasant surmise, without a glance forward at any possible treachery in his guest, give way to all his natural, kind-hearted civility in solicitous inquiries after Mr. Frank Churchill's accommodation on his journey, though through the sad evils of sleeping 2 nights on the road, and expressed very genuine unmixed anxiety to know that he had certainly escaped catching cold, which, however, he could not allow him to feel quite assured of himself till after another. Many errands for Mrs. Weston at Ford's, but he need not hurry anybody else. His son, too well bred to hear the hint, rose immediately also, saying, As you are going farther on business, sir, I will take the opportunity of paying a visit, which must be paid some day or other, and therefore may as well be paid now. I have the honor of being acquainted with a neighbor of yours, turning to Emma, a lady residing in or near Highbury, a family of the name of Fairfax. I shall have no difficulty, I suppose, in finding the house, though Fairfax, I believe, is not the proper name. I should say rather Barnes or Bates. Do you know any family of that name? To be sure we do, cried his father. Mrs. Bates. We passed her house. His father. Sorry, not her father. To be sure we do, cried his father. Oh, could you close the blinds? The sun has arrived in the square of our window. It comes up on my eyes. There we go. To be sure we do, cried his father. Mrs. Bates, we passed her house. I saw Miss Bates at the window. True, you are acquainted with Miss Fairfax. I remember you knew her at Weymouth, and a fine girl she is. Call upon her, by all means. There is no necessity for my calling this morning, said the young man. Another day would do as well. But there was that degree of acquaintance at Weymouth, which... go today. Do not defer it. What is right to be done cannot be done too soon. And besides, I must give you a hint, Frank. Any want of attention to her here should be carefully avoided. You saw her with the Campbells when she was the equal of everybody she mixed with, but here she is with a poor old grandmother who has barely enough to live on. If you do not call early, it will be a slight. The son looked convinced. I have heard her speak of the acquaintance, said Emma. She is a very elegant young woman. He agreed to it, but with so quiet a yes as inclined her almost to doubt his real concurrence. And yet there must be a very distinct sort of elegance for the fashionable world, if Jane Fairfax could be thought only extraordinarily gifted with it. If you were never particularly struck by her manners before, said she, I think you will today. You will see her to advantage, see her and hear her. No, I am afraid you will not hear her at all, for she has an aunt who never holds her tongue. You are acquainted with Miss Jane Fairfax, sir, are you? Said Mr. Woodhouse, always the last to make his way in conversation. Then give me leave to assure you, you will find her a very agreeable young lady. She is staying here on a visit to her grandmamma and aunt, very worthy people. I have known them all my life. They will be certainly extremely glad to see you, I am sure, and one of my servants shall go with you to show you the way. How kind.
Yes.
My dear sir, upon no account in the world. My father can direct me. But your father is not going so far. He is only going to the Crown, quite on the other side of the street. And there are a great many houses. You might be very much at a loss. And it is a very dirty walk, unless you keep on the footpath. But my coachman can tell you where you had best cross the street. So Mr. Woodhouse to be like, oh, you're going somewhere that is like across the street and like maybe down slightly from where your father is going. Like you need to be told exactly where is the best place to cross the street.
Yes.
Mr. Frank Churchill still declined it, looking as serious as he could, and his father gave his hearty support by calling out, "Oh, my good friend, this is quite unnecessary. Frank knows a puddle of water when he sees it. And as to Mrs. Bates, he may get there from the Crown in a hop, step, and a jump." They are permitted to go alone, and with a cordial nod from one and a graceful bow from the other, the two gentlemen took leave. Emma remained very well pleased with this beginning of the acquaintance, and could now engage to think of them all at Randall's any hour of the day, with full confidence in their comfort. All right.
What are you doing, huh? You're walking.
That is the end of chapter 23. What, 23, right? Yeah. So chapter 24 will be tomorrow. Perfect. Oh, just 48 minutes. It's like sometimes it's like weirdly under, but I'm afraid to read another chapter. And sometimes I do read another chapter and go over an hour. So this was perfect timing.
Wait,
today.
Are you doing it tomorrow?
Oh, not tomorrow. Ooh, thank you.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is my day off. Tomorrow is Saturday. And then Sunday I will be doing a live stream concert here on the same channel. For everyone on Instagram, that's youtube.com/thesarahshay. I'll be doing a concert at 6 p.m. I used to do them at 7. I'm moving them to 6 to make them consistent with this and see if that like time works better for some people. I know it's a bit, 7 to 9 was a bit late for people on the East Coast. So I want to try it moving a little bit earlier. Anyway, we'll see if that works. I am considering switching to back and forth between Saturday and Sunday. Some people have requested Saturdays. So the week after maybe Saturday, but this weekend, Sunday, this channel, if you go to my regular YouTube channel and look under the list of live streams, there are pages already made up for like the next 7 or 8 streams that I have happening, including these daily ones and the concert on Sunday. So you can hit set reminder below any one of those, and YouTube will give you a little ping when I go live. So if you want to do that, that is an option. So thank you very much for tuning in. YouTube and also Instagram.